Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about Nissan 370Z and whether I should have waited to get the new Nissan Z. Let's get into it. So 2019 Nissan 370Z Nismo, this is the version 2, making 350 horsepower, 273 pound-feet of torque from a naturally aspirated V6. Now, question, do you buy this at $35,000 to $40,000 for a more mint OEM condition? Or do you spend close to $50,000 for the new Nissan Z, making 400 horsepower, 350 pound-feet of torque from a twin-turbo V6? Now, I kind of wanted to do this video to kind of explain my thought process before buying this car, whether or not I should have bought the new Nissan Z, and how has it been kind of owning this for the last 2 years. You know, if you're like me and you lusted after these Z cars since Need for Speed Underground 2 or Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, the 350Z was kind of the car we all grew up with. For me personally, this is the one that kind of got me into this whole car passion. And nearly, a decade later, I was finally able to get my first Z car. It was a 2009 base 6-speed manual. Had that car for maybe 5 years, brought it up to 130,000 miles. I was planning on keeping it forever because I just love the Z car so much, but you know, it being higher mileage, I actually wanted to replace that Z car for something with a little bit less mileage. But at the same time too, I was thinking, what if I upgrade it to a Nismo or maybe even get something even more newer like the new Nissan Z? For a few months, I was actually debating on whether or not I get this Nismo versus the new Z. Do I regret buying this instead of the new Z? Now, I kind of summed it up to 4 questions you should probably ask yourself when you're in this situation. So probably the most important aspect to me, and also probably the most subjective, is looks. Which one do you think looks better? Now you might find what I think to be the complete opposite, or you're just thinking I'm being delusional. But for me, this is the coolest looking Z car that Nissan has ever made. Classic yet modern, aggressive but not overstyled. Now when this car first came out, immediately I fell in love with it. And in today's era of new cars, for me personally, it's kind of hard to find that feeling. I don't know if I'm just getting old. Now, here's what you have with it being a version 2 Nismo. You got an updated front fascia with horizontal LED daytime running lights. You got red accents throughout, new side skirts, new rear bumper, a little bit more boxy angled. You got a duckbill spoiler, this red sticker on the side mirrors, Recaro bucket seats, also these two-tone 19-inch forged wheels. And again, in my biased opinion, this is the best looking Z car that Nissan has ever made. The most refined 370Z to come out from the factory. You know, to me, it's original. It's not trying to look like 3 cars at once. When it first came out, it was just so stunning to me. The first time I saw it being pulled over on the side of the road, I almost rear-ended the car in front of me. But unfortunately, I can't really say the same about the new Z. Now, don't get me wrong, the new Z is actually a beautiful car. You know, sleek side profile with that classic sports car silhouette. The rear is probably the best part of it. You know, you have a mix between the 300ZX, maybe a little bit of S14, but for me, what kind of lost it is the front end. Now, the front end, you know, you have that massive rectangular grille. In my opinion, it kind of just looks a little unfinished, you know, something that was drawn up from the concept and they kind of just released it as is. You know, you don't have much accents, no aggressive lines, no, you know, fog lights, diffusers. It's just giant rectangle. And in my opinion too, it doesn't really go with the shape of the headlights. Now, the headlights itself is a little bit small, so it's kind of strange that you have like really tiny headlights and a massive, massive grille. I don't know if that's just the trend that these newer cars are starting to head, but kind of, in my opinion, it doesn't really, you know, fit the shape of the car. You know, the few times I do see it on the road, it's cool to look at, but honestly, I don't really lose my mind when I see it. You know, I thought eventually it will kind of grow onto me, but the more I look at it, especially in pictures, I thought it would be fixed in person. I don't know, it just doesn't look that cohesive or timeless in my opinion. You know, the new Z is kind of just a mix between 240Z and 300ZX. A little bit Frankenstein. You know, to me, the 370 was a little bit more original in its looks. Again, I'm not saying that the new Z is ugly by any means, but just for me personally, it didn't do it for me when it first came out, meaning I didn't immediately fall in love with it like I did with this. Not as original compared to the 370Z, in my biased opinion. You know, I've seen them a few times on the road. They look really nice, especially the side profile and the rear end. But just like overall, it doesn't really give me that same exact feeling when I first saw these on the road and when I, you know, still see, you know, 370Zs, especially the Nismos on the road. And I just feel like if they continue with the Z, they're probably going to refresh the front end, making the current gens, you know, immediately outdated, especially if they absolutely nail it. Again, I don't hate how the new Z looks. It's all subjective, and of course I'm being biased. But for me, looks is probably the most important factor when buying a car. And I think this car just looks really cool. You know, having a sports car that just looks so good while it's parked, even better when it's in motion. You know, instant love when it was first released. Whenever you walk up to it, you get so excited when you hit that unlock button and sit inside. And to this day, this thing still gets plenty of attention on the road. You know, a nearly 15-year-old car, a lot of people can't really tell that it came out from '09. To me, this thing just looks perfect from factory and probably will never age, in my opinion. You know, I just get so happy whenever I walk up to it, whenever I sit inside, and even more excited when I see these things on the road. And then for me, that's kind of when you know you bought the right car. All right, number two, another thing to consider when you're cross-shopping between this car and the new Z is its price and its relative competition. You know, at $50,000 for the new Z Performance, you kind of have a lot of options there. You know, obviously you have the new Supra, the new Mustang GT, even the Shelby GT350, you know, Civic Type R, Integra Type S. You can get a used BMW M2, used F80 or F82 M3, M4, even like a C7 Grand Sport Corvette. 997, 911, you have Caymans, you know, the list kind of goes on. You know, there's just such a huge competition at that $50,000 price bracket. Now, stepping down to $35,000 to $40,000, you have the base Z, probably can get into a 4-cylinder Supra for a little bit over $40,000. You can get the new WX, a fully optioned Miata, the new GR86 after taxes. Now in the used car market, older gen Caymans, C6, Z06, Camaro SS, Subaru STI, FK8 Type R, you know, not too much within that price bracket. To me, this is probably my favorite car within that range. You know, I understand it isn't the most capable, not the most special or the rarest, but for me, this is just my taste. And then when you're looking at cars for the 50 to 55,000 price bracket, there's just so much out there. For me personally, if I had to choose, I probably wouldn't get the new Nissan Z. I'd probably get, a 997 Carrera, F82 M4, maybe even a GT350. All of those three would kind of be my top choice. If I did have to stick in the Japanese realm, I would honestly pick the Supra over the new Z. And maybe that's just me because, I've been in the Z platform for the last 5 years and going on to 7, so maybe I'm just a little bit jaded. But when you're at 50 to 55,000, you just have so much more choices. But yeah, tell me what you would rather get at, the 35 to $40,000 price bracket, the $50,000 price bracket. I only have 800 subs, so I actually read each and every comment, and I'm genuinely curious to know what you guys would have to say. But yeah, maybe because I'm just too familiar with the Z platform. I had the base Z for 5 years, this one for 2 years, so going on to 7 total. Maybe that's why I don't want to shell out $50,000 for a car that's nearly identical. And that's kind of what I want to get onto next, is more of like the similarities and differences between this car and the new one. All right, number 3, when you're cross-shopping between the new Z and this one, you have to think about, do those changes justify a higher price tag? Let's talk first about similarities. Overall, it shares basically the same chassis. The new Z is basically a massaged, more refined version of the 370, and probably even more so the 350Z. The manual gearbox feels nearly identical. You can't really rush the shifts. It feels a little bit truckish. The rear trunk layout is exactly the same. You have a rear strut tower, exactly the same. The seat bottoms in the 370Z is carry over into the new Z. The door panels, the switches, AC controls, nearly identical. Now I understand Nissan, they're not really a highly profitable company. They can't really invest too much money into newer sports cars. I get that. But for me, if you're gonna be spending close to like $55,000 after taxes for a car that I'm too familiar with, to me it's just not worth it. Now let's move on to more of the differences. Obviously, you have a VR engine instead of the VQ, 400 horsepower, 350 pound-feet of torque from a twin-turbo V6. You have Apple CarPlay, a more updated interior, and then obviously different looks. To me, with it being the VR motor instead of the VQ, it kind of loses that iconic VQ sound. And especially in the new Z, when you have the stock exhaust, it's even more muted. Inside the car, it sounds better, especially better than this pumped-in audio that the newer Zs give you. But outside the car, it's like you absolutely need an exhaust versus this one here. And then the new Z weighs about 35 to 3,700 pounds. And then this Nismo weighs about 34 to 3,500 pounds. So you have about a 200-pound difference. Now I understand that car is heavier, but because it is making more power, more torque, it actually feels a lot lighter. But still, $15,000 to $20,000 price increase to get you into a new Z that kind of feels nearly identical. You'll be getting more power and more torque, a more updated interior, a completely different looking car that you haven't been seeing for the past 15 years. There are some drawbacks. Like I said, stock exhaust sounds super muted. You kind of lose that iconic VQ sound. The manual feels nearly identical to these cars. And then it switched over to EPS from hydraulic steering, which some people say the EPS actually feels better than the hydraulic rack on these cars. But other than that, both cars, you have double wishbones in the front suspension. And overall, you get a through and through Japanese-built sports car. So that's basically a gist of the differences and similarities between the prior Gen Z and the current gen. Let me know what I might have missed, and let me know what you would rather take. And then lastly, number 4, longevity. And this is probably where I lose mostly everyone. You know, do you plan to keep this car long term, or are you someone that kind of gets a car for 3 to 4 years and then trades out into a new one? You know, if it's short term, probably would recommend getting a new Z. You know, experience it, it's new, more power, more updated, more refined, and then probably just move on to the next. But for me, I plan to keep this car even long term because it, you know, basically completes my JDM Holy Trinity. You know, this 370Z being the Nismo is basically future-proof in my opinion. You know, the last of its kind, the best looking, the most refined, most modernized, and probably the most rare 370Z to come out from Nissan. You know, this is the last naturally aspirated Z with a whopping 3.7 liter V6, making actual VQ noises. And this Nismo actually comes with a manual, unlike the newer ones, for now. Now, I don't treat my cars as investments, but I can only imagine how valuable this car might be in the next 20 or 30 years, especially if it is left OEM. You know, just how cool would it be to be driving like a 30 to 40-year-old sports car that's worth way more than you had expected, that everyone's still lusting after. And then old Nissans generally do pretty well in terms of value over the long term. You know, you have the Holy Grail R34 costing way like over $200,000 to $300,000. 300ZXs are starting to go up in value, especially if left OEM. You know, you have the original 240, 260, 280 Datsun Zs. And then 350Z Nismos are actually even starting to go up now too. So this is why I think the Nismo 370Z is just a little bit more future-proof compared to the newer Z. Because going back to it, if the new Z continues, if Nissan still has money to kind of refresh and update it, especially if they nail that refresh, it's going to make these current gens a little bit more outdated. You know, what if it comes out with more power, it makes it more capable, they fix the softness that a lot of people seem to complain about those cars. But you know, thinking back at it, Nissan, they're still in a rough position. They're not making too much money. And then sports cars are kind of just like desserts for the company. So who knows how much effort they'll actually be putting into those cars, especially after sales have been slumping for them. You know, if Nissan really doesn't do well with those cars, you know, what if it's actually the last Z to come out from them? But, you know, I doubt Nissan would do that. You know, that's kind of like saying Mazda would discontinue the Miata. So if you want a forever potential collector's car, the 370Z Nismo is probably my top pick. You know, right now it's at such a good value. The new Z still has years for it to depreciate before it can start climbing up. And then if it gets refreshed, you know, the earlier gens probably won't go too far. So $50,000 just kind of seems like a hard sell when you can kind of anticipate them being like 40s, maybe the higher 30s in like the next 4 to 5 years. But none of that really matters. You know, if you want something new, something that's purely Japanese, makes good power, and then you're probably going to be out of it in the next 3 or 4 years. You know, the new Z is actually a pretty good deal. You know, good looks, mostly the rear, classic sports car silhouette, good power, 400 horsepower with a manual. You know, I hope people actually buy the new Z so that way Nissan continues it. For me, I'm a little bit of a hypocrite. I want them to continue it, but I'm telling you to buy a used one versus a new one. But that's just my subjective opinion. You know, my situation might be different than yours. You know, if I've never had a 370Z previously, I probably would highly consider getting that new Z over Supra, over 997 Carrera, F82 M4, things like that. So there you go. 4 things to consider when you're cross-shopping between the 370Z Nismo versus the current Gen Z. You know, which one do you think looks better? Which one is more timeless to you? Which one gets you excited when you see it on the road? You know, number 2, what other cars within that price bracket would you strongly consider? You know, at $50,000, is that your top pick? At $35,000 or $40,000, is this your top pick? For me, at $35,000, this is my favorite. But at $50,000 to $55,000, I'd probably pick something else. Number 3, you know, does the $50,000 difference add as much of an upgrade when you're comparing it to the previous gen? After being in a 370Z for nearly 7 years, it feels nearly identical other than the power. And then lastly, number 4, how long do you plan on keeping this car? You know, is this something that you want to keep as a future collector's car, or are you the type to get in and out of a car within 3 or 4 years? If it's the latter, probably recommend getting the new Z. If you want something that's a little bit more future-proof, this one's probably the better pick. So that's it for today's video. You know, do I regret buying the 370Z Nismo over the new Z? Absolutely not. You know, I love this thing. You know, as I said, I want to keep it forever. It completes my JDM Holy Trinity. You know, I had absolutely no desire to trade it in after driving the new Nissan Z. Ultimately, I just don't get as excited when I see these newer Zs on the road versus this one. But that's just me. You know, of course, I'm being biased. I'm probably trying to talk up these values so one day I can sell it. But if you're in a similar situation like me, I hope this video kind of provides some insight. You know, let me know what you think. Are you taking this over the new Z, or what else would you rather get at that price bracket? What other choices would you have at $35,000 or $40,000? Well, for me, at $35,000, you already know what I'm taking. But anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for helping me get to 800 subscribers. Please hit a like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next video.